Hey, it's Jimmy Holbeck here, just trying to think through the Australian cricket dilemma that's happening at the moment. There's obviously a lot of people really disappointed, angry, ashamed of what the Australian cricket team has done. So I wanted to draw out perhaps three lines of indignation where people seem to be drawing their line of indignation when it comes to condemning the Australian cricket team. I think it's an interesting sort of way of looking at what is a very controversial issue. So the first line of indignation seems to be where do we draw the line from something being like that meh to, yeah, I don't like that, but it's part of the game, to, okay, this has stepped over the line, over the boundary. So we know that in cricket, the bowlers can use spittle, or the fielders can use spittle to tamper with the ball, as long as it's not sweetened or affected in any other way. We know that bowlers can and do run down the middle of the pitch to try and change the pitch for their spin bowlers later in the matches. So where is the line? When do we start to go, right, I have now moral indignation that we have stepped over the boundary? Because it seems quite arbitrary sometimes in where we set those lines. But it's an interesting thing of when you're looking at this issue that people have different understandings of where that line should be drawn. So the second line of indignation seems to be around how does this fit in comparison to other social events that are happening at the moment. So certainly on the position of earning virtual signalling points, this one's a big one, because how does this compare with some of the really important things in our society and debates we're having around offshore detention centres, Indigenous affairs, policy decisions and the like, and the South African farmers at the moment. You know, all these things are really contentious. So the argument is, and the position that some people are drawing their line at is, well, how does this fit in social importance? And for a lot of people it doesn't fit very highly at all. It's actually quite a small event, cricket itself, and even just someone scratching a ball a little bit, and that's the argument that's being put forward here. On the other side of the argument, I guess, is that Australian cricket symbolises something for a lot of Australians. So there's this line of indignation that seems to fluctuate depending on your position on those two things. And I guess the third line of indignation, which I find quite interesting, is the one, I guess, drawn out by Professor of Clinical Psychology Jordan Peterson on other areas that I guess I've been interested in, is why do good people do evil things? And in a lecture he's talking to his students about, could they have the capacity to become guards at Nazi concentration camps? And for him, he says yes, and he says it's an interesting and important part of life is to realise that you have this capacity to be evil. He's obviously a Jungian psychologist that believes in the works of Carl Jung on persona and shadow, and the shadow is basically the part of you that is a monster that is capable of doing incredibly dangerous things. And from that perspective, if you feel like you have the capacity to do what the Australian cricketers did, then you will probably, your line of indignation and condemnation will be drawn at certainly a different level, because you will realise that maybe that could have been me that acted in that way, and if that was the case, how would I want people to be responding right now? So that's another line of indignation that I think is pretty important. So I guess putting those three lines of indignation together and thinking about what can we say to our kids and what do we take from this, and I think there's perhaps two lessons that we can probably take from it. The first is that sometimes what drives you to be the best also drives you over the line. You're willing to win at all costs. It sounds like it's been quite an adversarial test series. Obviously David Warner's reputation has been attacked with masks of a man that allegedly had been with his wife, and so sometimes that challenge to your ego and to your honour drives people or influences people to do things that doesn't best represent them. But I also think that we need to look at ourselves in that respect as well. If you're willing to break the rules in society, and I don't know many people that aren't, in regards to speeding, parking in illegal places and the like, if you're willing to do that, then what makes you think that you don't have the capacity under pressure to break the rules of a cricket game? And so that's something that Jordan Peterson says. He has a quote at the end of this lecture on YouTube where he says something like, if you don't think you're the sort of person that would do that, then you're the sort of person who is doing that. And his point is very much around looking at the shadow that exists, the monster within that has enabled humans to do really evil things. And his point is that you are one of them. You're a human. You're not outside the capabilities of doing what some of these people have done. So that's one part of it. I also think there's an interesting part when we talk about the honour contest, and this is particularly for young boys, that a lot of fights start over an honour contest. There was a criminologist in Australia called Polk, and he spoke about the the contest in homicides and in violence. And it's an interesting one where if your honour is challenged, you respond in an emotional way. And I think if we think about perhaps what led, even though it was premeditated, what led perhaps to this incident, if it is indeed a one-off, is that these guys felt threatened over there in some way. No excuse, of course, but they felt threatened. They started relying on their limbic system, their emotional brain, that looks out for threat, and they stopped thinking according to the values of the game that maybe are regulated in the prefrontal areas of your brain. So particularly around shame, I think this is a really important one for boys, to be able to negotiate when they're being called out in schoolyards and the like, at the pub, for instance, to be able to say, a lot of me actually wants to punch you in the face right now, but because I know that there are consequences for that, I won't do it. And that, I guess, is the lesson when parents are looking for what can we take from this. Is there's consequences for all people. It doesn't matter who you are. We've often said, that the top people don't face consequences, but we'll see consequences for these guys. And then I, for one, know I'm capable of doing what they did. And so I hope that at some point they get a chance to come back and represent Australia and maybe redeem themselves in some way.